Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and thank you for joining us. Tonight on All In, our first guest is a journalist who should be prosecuted for breaking the NSA surveillance story. That, at least, the opinion of one prominent U.S. congressman. Glenn Greenwald of The Guardian joins me in a moment. And later, I don't remember agreeing to any of this when I clicked OK to those Facebook terms of service. How do the giant tech companies at the heart of the NSA revelations recover from this? We'll discuss that coming up. Plus, during an extremely contentious House hearing today, one Republican came this close to going full Todd Akin. Republican male legislators talking about rape. Again. We will give you the grisly details. But we begin tonight with the unfolding spy novel that continues to play out in real life right before our eyes. Today, the battle lines over NSA leaks are being dramatically drawn, the rhetoric on all sides is heating up, and the stakes for everyone connected to this story are rising. After days of complete radio silence, NSA leaker Edward Snowden surfaced today in Hong Kong with an explosive interview with the English-language newspaper, the South China Morning Post, in which he charged the U.S. government has been hacking Hong Kong and China for years, telling the paper that he believed there had been 61,000 NSA hacking operations globally, with hundreds of targets in Hong Kong and on the mainland. He also explained why he's in Hong Kong. Quote, "I am not here to hide from justice. I am here to reveal criminality. I have had many opportunities to flee Hong Kong, but I would rather stay and fight the United States government in the courts because I have faith in Hong Kong's rule of law. My intention is to ask the courts and the people of Hong Kong to decide my fate." And on the same day Edward Snowden reemerged, NSA Director Army General Keith Alexander just happened to be slated to testify at a previously scheduled committee hearing on Capitol Hill. So, of course, he got a good grilling from members of Congress, eager for their first shot at some public, on-the-record answers from the NSA about the newly exposed spying programs. Under questioning from Senator Pat Leahy of Vermont about just how many terrorist attacks have been thwarted by the NSA's monitoring of telephone and internet records, Alexander said he couldn't give the exact number because that's classified. What he did give the committee was a ballpark figure in the dozens. There is, of course, no way to independently confirm that number. That is part of the problem in all this. But I am guessing that General Alexander chose those words under oath very, very carefully, as not to end up like his pal, James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, whose testimony back in March under questioning from Senator Ron Wyden looks really, really, really bad, given what we all know now.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
I think in poker that's called a tell. If you just watched that and thought the Clapper was thinking extra hard on an answer, well, that's because it's actually quite straining to come up with the least untruthful answer to a question you don't feel like answering truthfully.
In retrospect, I was asked, when are you going to stop beating your wife kind of question, which is meaning not answerable necessarily by a simple yes or no. So I responded in what I thought was the most truthful or least untruthful manner by saying no.
Yesterday, Senator Wyden called for an investigation related to Clapper's March testimony, saying, quote, "This job cannot be done responsibly if senators aren't getting straight answers to direct questions." But James Clapper will almost certainly not be the only person who's going to be investigated because of the leaks and their aftermath. There is, of course, Edward Snowden, who could very well be facing criminal charges any day now. And there is now a member of Congress calling for the prosecution of journalists involved in publishing the leaks. Well, actually, let me amend that. A journalist, one specific journalist. After first calling for action against journalists last night, Republican Congressman Peter King was asked to clarify his position today on Fox News. And clarify he did.
Do you believe that? You stand by that, both Greenwald and the Washington Post reporter?
I'm talking about Greenwald. Greenwald, not only did he disclose this information, he has said that he has the names of CIA agents and assets around the world, and they're threatening to disclose that. That, to me, is a direct attack against Americans, putting American lives at risk.
That Greenwald, Glenn Greenwald, who Peter King called responsible for a direct attack on the American people. That Glenn Greenwald, who's been in Hong Kong breaking the story that has sent ripples throughout the entire American political system, is, I believe, if we have him joining me now, columnist on civil liberties, and we do not have him now. You know what? We are working out some technical issues. We do have him? Great. Awesome. Glenn Greenwald, columnist on civil liberties and U.S. national securities for the Guardian newspaper, there in your monitor staring back at us unblinkingly, because that, of course, is a photo, and we appear to have him on the phone. Glenn, how are you?
Doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Okay. First, I want to get your reaction to Peter King's rhetoric in the last 2 days about prosecution, specifically singling you out as someone who is, quote, direct attack on America. I think he accused you of threatening to expose individual CIA covert agents. I just want to get your response, because he's been given a fair amount of airtime over the last 2 days to attack you. He's a sitting member of Congress. I understand you've been traveling. What is your response to Congressman King's accusations?
I don't think there are very many people who take Peter King very seriously. I also think that most Americans find instinctively repulsive the idea that journalists should be arrested and prosecuted for doing what journalists are supposed to do, which is reporting on what the United States government does in the dark. That said, he is the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, and the Obama administration has, in the recent past, flirted with the idea and even embraced some theories that would suggest that you can be held criminally liable for being a conspirator with your source if you act as a journalist. So it's not something that I would dismiss lightly. But what I thought was most remarkable was that the entire framework that he offered, the ground on which he made his call for my arrest and prosecution, was an outright fabrication, really a lie. I mean, he went on national television and accused me of having threatened to uncover and expose and publish the identities of covert CIA agents, as though I was Louis Libby or something. I have never remotely suggested that I even have in my possession the identities of CIA covert agents. I do not, nor have I ever threatened that I would ever publish those. I never would. And so it wasn't just that it was such an extremist piece of advocacy on his part. It was that it was based in a complete fiction.
The never would sentence you just said there, I think this is a really, to me, an important point in all this. And I think because we have the hangover of WikiLeaks, which was, you've defended quite strenuously and been an advocate for both Bradley Manning and Julian Assange and protecting the important role they played in stirring a debate, but was quite different in the sense that it was bulk disclosure. And I think even Bradley Manning himself would say that he didn't have the ability to read and vet every one of the 850,000 documents. These scoops have been much more thoroughly vetted, both by Edward Snowden and by yourself and other journalists who've reported on them at The Guardian. And so my question to you is, this PRISM slide, there were 41 slides in the PRISM PowerPoint slide that was one of the most blockbuster revelations. The Guardian put 4 and then a 5th slide up. What are we to make of the fact that 36 of those slides have not been disclosed? What does that say about the way that you are approaching this work, about what secrets can and should be put before the public and which ones shouldn't be?
Yeah, I think this is the critical point, Chris, that I really hope everybody walks away understanding. And first of all, I think there's a serious question about the extent to which Bradley Manning did read the documents that he disclosed, but let's leave that to the side. From the very first moment that I ever spoke with Edward Snowden, he was emphatic about the fact that he was not turning over to us all of the documents that he could get his hands on, that he had very carefully spent months looking at them, examining them, figuring out which ones the public should see and which ones would cause gratuitous harm, and said that he wasn't going to turn those over, including things like the names of covert CIA agents. He then, when he gave it to us, said, I don't want you to simply indiscriminately dump these documents. I want you to engage in a very rigorous standard journalistic assessment of what is in the public interest and what would cause harm. I want you to be very careful and judicious about figuring out what it is that the public should know in terms of how journalism functions, because he didn't want the accusation to be made validly that he was trying to harm the United States or that we were. And he was very clear about the fact that had his intent been to harm the United States, he could have sold the documents to foreign adversaries. He could have covertly passed them to foreign adversaries. He has given us all sorts of documents, the vast majority of which we have decided not to publish because either they're not relevant or because they would just cause gratuitous harm without informing the public. Every single thing that we have revealed is in the public interest. It is things that the U.S. government is doing that the public didn't know know but should know, and yet none of it can even remotely or conceivably be said to harm national security. Terrorists already know and have known for years that the U.S. government is trying to monitor and surveil their communications. We didn't tell terrorists anything they didn't know.
Right.
We told American citizens things that they didn't know about what their government is doing but should know.
Glenn, let me ask you this question about Snowden, and I understand, a lot has been made of him as a character, and I understand people being frustrated somewhat with that because, broadly speaking, the point here is the policy and what the government is doing, not Edward Snowden. That being said, it's a remarkable and incredibly compelling story, just from a human drama level, and as someone who actually sat down with him, has talked to him, in light of the interview he gave today to the English language paper in Hong Kong, do you have a sense of what the game plan here is? Because it just, what he has done is either, depending on your point of view, remarkably foolish or remarkably courageous, but he is really out on a limb right now.
Chris, I'm honestly meeting him and talking to him, and the first thing I did was on the first day that I met him, I spent 5 straight hours just questioning him as relentlessly as I could to have an understanding for what he's thinking, who he is, what he was really doing. And it was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life, one of the most formative, because it was really remarkable to look at somebody who had so rationally assessed the choice that they had made, one that they knew was likely to result in their imprisonment for decades, if not life, and yet who genuinely concluded that his conscience compelled him to step forward and disclose that the NSA has been systematically lying to Congress, that they've been deceiving the American people, that they're building this worldwide spying apparatus, that he felt that the need to do that outweighed his own personal self-interest. That said, he also knows that the U.S. government is the most powerful entity on earth, that it considers him to be the number one most wanted individual, that they intend to, if they get their hands on him, basically destroy his life. And although I haven't discussed specifically with him what his plans are, he knows that he is holding some cards, given that he had access to very top secret information on the part of the most secretive agency in the world, and intends to figure out how best he can protect himself. That's my guess as to what it is he's doing.
In terms of the revelations that we've gotten so far, and they fall into a number of different categories, but I do want to ask you before I let you go, there has been some pushback on the reporting, particularly about the PRISM program, there's another program codenamed Blarney that come from those PowerPoint slides that use the phrase directly from the servers or direct access. And there was pushback by the tech companies who are listed in those slides saying we didn't give any direct access. And there's some question, I think, about what exactly that phrase means or could mean. And I just want you to clarify your best understanding of what the reality is about the nexus between how the NSA is working with these private tech companies.
Sure. We've published 4 stories so far. The only one about which there has been any questions raised is the one that the only one the Washington Post also published, which is the PRISM story. Our story was written differently than the way the Post wrote theirs, which is why they've had to walk back theirs. Our story was the following. We have a document from the NSA that very clearly claims that they are collecting directly from the servers of these internet giants. That's the exact language that this document used. We went to those internet companies before publishing and asked them, and they denied it, and we put into the story very prominently that they deny it. Our story is that there's a discrepancy between the relationship that the private sector and the government has in terms of what the NSA claims and what the technology companies claim. What is definitely true, and follow-up reporting by the Times has proven this, is that there have been all kinds of negotiations about backdoor access. They have agreements in all sorts of ways to share data with the government. I don't think anyone knows at this point exactly what the nature of those arrangements are. And the reason we published our story and the reason we presented it as this discrepancy is precisely because whatever the tech companies and the government are doing in terms of turning over data to the government should be done in public. We should know what agreements they've reached. We should know what the government has asked for and what they're negotiating with now in terms of access. What we do know for sure is that the government has a program that targets the communication over these companies that huge numbers of people around the world use to communicate with one another, and we think that there should be accountability and transparency for whatever those exact agreements are.
Glenn Greenwald, columnist for The Guardian newspaper, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
A Democrat's military sexual assault bill has been struck down in the Senate by a Democrat. More on that with co-sponsor of the bill, Senator Barbara Boxer, coming up.